Hello and welcome to episode number 240. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I am Cornelius Fichtner. Nice to have you with us. This episode of the podcast will be especially interesting for all those of you who want to become better project managers, or for those who love to read, or for all those who fall into both categories. That is because our guest, Elizabeth Harron, will give us her review of 3 books that are related to project management, including lots of great takeaways for everyone. The books are Do Nothing by Keith Murnaghan, Real Influence by Mark Goulston and John Ullman, and finally, Strategies for Project Sponsorship by Vicky James, Ron Rosenhead, and Peter Taylor. Elizabeth also wrote a review for each of these 3 books on her website, and I encourage you to stop by at pm4girls.com, that's pm, the number 4, and then girls.com, because she does address a few angles on her blog that we did not discuss. But now, without further ado, here are lots of good project management tips and tricks in the form of 3 book reviews.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview. Today with Elizabeth Harron, author, blogger, and speaker.
Hello, Elizabeth, and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hello, Cornelius. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So I was reading your website, A Girl's Guide to Project Management, the other day, and I saw that you had 3 fabulous book reviews on there and decided to bring you on. Very well written.
Thank you very much.
Yes. And of course, all our listeners are now frowning, going, oh my God, book reviews. I'm better going to turn this off. I'm not going to listen to this. This is not interesting. Oh, don't worry, people. Elizabeth is a project manager like you are, like I am. Elizabeth knows what we project managers need. And trust me, the things she has to say about these 3 books, they are applicable to your projects. And for each of these 3 books, we're going to give you a couple of takeaways that you can most likely apply on your books. On your projects tomorrow. All right, so the 3 books we're going to review are titled Strategies for Project Sponsorship. Then we also talk about Real Influence, but we are going to start by doing nothing. Well, the book is called Do Nothing. Tell us a little bit about this book, Elizabeth. What's it about?
It's called Do Nothing, but it has got this subtitle, which is How to Stop Overmanaging and Become a Great Leader. And it's basically the theory that you should be doing less of the doing and more facilitating other people to get the results that you want, which I think is very applicable to projects because that's what we do all the time, isn't it? We have to take that step back and help our teams make sure they can have everything they need to be able to deliver a successful result for the project. So it's really his tips it's a guy called Keith Murnaghan, and it's his tips for how do you make sure that you can be that hands-off manager by being a great leader and by empowering your people to do what they need to do.
Right. He also talks about Murnaghan's leadership law. What is that?
Think of the reaction that you want first and then determine the actions you can take to maximize the chances that those reactions will actually happen. So what it's really saying is think about your own actions, but don't focus on that too much. What you need to do really is focus on what you want the other person to do. So instead of focusing all about on how you're going to run the meeting, think about what you want the meeting to, what decisions you want made, what you want the team members to go away from that meeting and then do. Focus on the reactions that you want and then change your behavior to give you the best possible chance of getting that outcome.
Mm-hmm. Now, the title in itself is surprising because, we're project managers. We're supposed to be doing something constantly, right? And he tells us, no, do nothing. Is there anything else that you found surprising in the book?
Yes, he recommends that you scrap performance goals. And I found that quite
interesting.
A surprise because we often have, you'll probably have personal performance goals that you'll set with your manager, but we'll also have project performance goals critical success factors, key success indicators, things like that. But he says, don't bother about those. They become irrelevant. As soon as you've hit them, they're replaced with another target set by management. It's all arbitrary. Instead, he recommends that you put together learning goals. So you're aiming to learn from the work that you're doing and get better. And I thought that's probably quite a good approach to use as a continuous process improvement type thing that we could use during post-project reviews.
Now, from your perspective, how does this book actually relate to project management? It seems more related to project leadership.
Yes, but I think project leaders, it's where project management's going. I think in 10 years, there'll be very few people who are doing solely management in a project-related job. We all should be leading, even though we might not have the grand title of project director, we might not be in a sponsorship role. We should all be trying to lead our projects rather than just manage the plan, manage the risk log, manage the schedule. And I think the whole shift that we're seeing in project management towards being a more leadership skill is reflected in this book. So I do think it does have a relevance to the way project management is going. And I think it's something project managers are going to have to face up to in the years to come. We're definitely moving more towards project leadership.
All right. So does he give us any tips, any steps, any approaches that we can follow in order to do nothing? Because before I can do nothing, I have to make sure that somebody else is doing something, right?
Yes, exactly. So he has four tips, really, about how you can unblock yourself and you can be a better leader. And he says the reasons leaders don't get the results they want is because they suffer from these four problems. So they're egocentric, everything's always about them. So he recommends we stop focusing on ourselves and like I said earlier, focus on the benefits that you're bringing to the team and the results that you want the team to achieve. He says that leaders don't get the results they want because they lack empathy. So they can't put themselves in the shoes of the team members and really make a concerted effort to feel how the team members feel. And if you can understand why people are reacting the way that they are, you'll be able to get better results out of them. And he also says that leaders suffer from believing that others understand them. And I think whether you're a leader or not, whether you're a project manager or not, that's probably something that we all suffer from, the belief that others understand exactly where we're coming from. So you can send off an email to your project team and they will all know exactly what you're talking about and understand you completely. And that isn't the case. So again, it comes back to being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand how your actions will influence others. And finally, he says that leaders focus far too much on what they do themselves, and again, not on how they can change those actions so that they can empower other people. So those are his 4 tips, really.
All right. Is there anything that you have taken out of this book that works for you personally, that you think, this is something that I'm going to do on my projects going forward?
Well, I am one of those busy project managers. I like to be doing the doing. I like to be involved in things. It did remind me that it's sometimes more effective to take a step back. And I suppose I did know that already, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded. I think because a project manager can't be everywhere, you can't make all the decisions, especially on large projects. Anything that encourages you to encourage your team members to step up and take actions and decisions for themselves has to be a good thing.
All right. How thick is this book in terms of pages?
Well, I read it on my Kindle, but it's 215 pages if you buy a paperback version.
All right. So 215 pages thick. Lovely. Any final thoughts about Do Nothing?
I did enjoy reading it. And the only final point that I would make about this is that there's a lot of things in it about basketball. So there are stories and examples, but he draws on a lot of stories and examples from the world of basketball. And, coming from the UK, I know nothing about basketball. So a lot of that passed me by. But if you are a basketball fan, then this would be a really good book for you.
All right. Moving on from doing nothing to gaining a real influence. Give us the synopsis of this book here. Who wrote it? Who's it for? What's it about?
Okay, well, again, this book has a subtitle. It's called Real Influence, with the subtitle Persuade Without Pushing and Gain Without Giving In, which sounds quite glamorous, I suppose. And it's by 2 people, Mark Goulston and John Ullman, and it came out in January this year, 2013. So it's for people who, I think it's for people who want other people to get to do what they want them to do. So it's for people who are trying to influence others, but in a way that makes it compatible with modern management techniques, because I think we all know command and control is not really the way that we get things done anymore, especially not in a project environment. So to be able to influence people successfully in a matrix setup, in a matrix organization, you need to use different techniques than just telling people what to do. So this book is really aimed at explaining what you can do to get the results that you want through influencing others.
The main point, I believe, they start from is something they call our here and their there. You actually have to read this in order to see how it's spelled to get it right. Nevertheless, can you tell us about our here and their there?
Okay, it basically means understanding the starting positions of both parties when you come to work with them to influence them. So you aren't starting from the same position, so there's no point pretending that you are really. Where you're starting from is our here, and where they're starting from is their there. So we're here and they're over there, and you need to try and bring them together. And it might make more sense if I give you a quote from the book, actually, which is, when you practice disconnected influence, you're stuck in what we call your here. You can see your position, your facts, and your intentions clearly. But to connect with the people you're trying to influence, you need to communicate from a perspective we call their there. You need to see their position, their facts, and their intentions clearly. So that's where the book starts from, and the rest of it is really the strategies and approaches to help you close that gap between where you are and where they are when it comes to influencing.
Okay. The final sentence of this quote you gave us, you need to see their position, their facts, and their intentions clearly. Do they give us some help in regards to how we can actually see their position, their facts, and their intentions? Because it's, they're over there. How could I know what their position is?
They've got a number of different techniques and strategies in the book. Some of the ones that I liked is to be influenceable, something that I hadn't thought of before, because that shows people that you're open to suggestions and they will be more open back. So if you come to the table and you're prepared to shift your position slightly, even if it's about something completely different, it shows that you are open to considering other people's opinions and views, and they will mirror that behaviour back to you. So I thought that was quite good. But a lot of it is all about building relationships over the long term. So building a great reputation and building great relationships, and they don't happen overnight. But if you have achieved that, then when you do need to get someone to do something for you, it's a lot easier because you already have that relationship and they already know that you wouldn't be asking unless it was important.
Right. And I think relationship building is something that all project managers need to do because, we often are in matrix situations. We don't have real power. And the only item we can result back to is influencing, right? That's all we have. Influencing people and hoping that they will, follow our lead and subscribe to the goals of our project. So let's move on to that. How do we influence people according to the book? How can we get things done?
Well, one of the things that they say is about making sure that you're the kind of person that other people want to work with. So I suppose that means being open, being friendly, making sure that you are listening to their point of view before you try to shift them to your point of view. So it really comes back to this point about making sure that you know what their position is and what they want the outcome to be, and then working together to achieve the best result for the project and for you.
So how has this book influenced you, so to speak? How did it affect you in terms of how you are planning to manage your projects in the future?
That's a very good question, because I thought I would find more things in the book a surprise or a challenge to my existing views. And actually, I didn't. And I think that might be because the concept of seeing things from the other person's point of view isn't particularly new to me. And it probably won't be very new to a lot of the listeners either, because it's something that as project managers, we don't have a lot of power over the team members, especially in a functional or a matrix business, and we don't have direct line management over our teams. So you do have to do this kind of influencing already. So there wasn't anything in the book that made me think, oh goodness, I absolutely have to change the way I work with this person to try and get things done. But I did like the idea of influencing by getting out of the way. And what they mean by that is to try to get things done, to get the result that you want by enabling other people to achieve it, and then just stepping back and letting it happen. So to try not to be in people's faces all the time saying, have you done this thing? Are you going to do this? This is what I want. Have you achieved it yet? But just to try to create an environment where everybody is empowered to just get on and do the work that they need to do.
Right. And the pointers that you've given us so far about build a great relationship, build a great reputation, be influenceable, influenced by getting out of the way. These are all pointers that they talk about in the book. And you have 6 that you list on your website as part of this book review. But you told me that there are many more of these pointers, right? So that the book is really a treasure trove of ideas of how to effectively influence the people around you.
Yes, there are a lot of it's quite a formal book to read, but there are plenty of examples and stories to illustrate the points. It's not academic, so it's not difficult to read. And there are lots of practical tips in there as well.
Are there any sports analogies?
No, not that I remember. I think I would have remembered.
All right, then. In that case, how thick is this book? Well, you probably read it on your Kindle as well. How many pages does it have?
I did. Amazon says it's 256 pages.
Okay, so roughly the same size as the first one that we had there. All right. Moving on to the third and final book, Strategies for Project Sponsorship. We kept this one for last because one of the authors is a friend of both of ours and also been a guest here on the project, and also because we believe that this book actually is most applicable to all project managers. Good information in there as well. Give us the skinny of this one.
Okay, well, this is a book with quite a misleading title, I think. It's Strategies for Project Sponsorship, and it doesn't have a subtitle. And it's by Vicky James, Ron Rosenhead, and Peter Taylor. So this is the book with the most authors. 3 people have come together to put this together. And it's actually based on some research that they did, which makes it quite interesting because every so often you get figures or examples and quotes from people who carried out their research survey. And that really does give it that extra dimension because it makes you feel as if it's not just 3 people's opinion, it's actually a lot of people's opinion, and they've come together to give you a really useful resource. So it's aimed at, well, the title makes it sound to me like it's aimed at project sponsors, Strategies for Project Sponsorship. You'd think that was the book that your project sponsor should get for Christmas. But actually, there's a lot of stuff in there that's relevant to project managers, including how to get the best out of your sponsor. And the whole first part of the book is addressed to the project manager. So it's got quite a wide audience, which I think is another good thing, because we all need to learn how to get more successful results from our sponsors, especially when we're lumbered with somebody who isn't very good.
Yeah, that's actually the impression that I got when I read the review on your website. I thought this is a book that addresses us project managers and tells us project managers how we can deal with sponsors who have absolutely no idea of what they're doing. And I think this is also one of the main premises of the book, right? And
it is.
If you can tell us a little bit about that.
Well, they talk about accidental project managers, and I expect that term will be familiar to quite a lot of your listeners.
Right. Yeah, most of us are.
Yes, exactly. And you just fall into a project management job because you get promoted into one, or you just happen to pick up the responsibility for managing something, and the project manager title sticks. But what I hadn't realised before I read this book is that it happens to sponsors as well. And the accidental project sponsor is something that I think we are going to see more and more. The authors say we're seeing it more and more. They've got no background in project management, or perhaps have never worked on another sort of project before, or in a project-based environment, but they are senior within the organisation, and they've come to that position based on other achievements. And then somebody said, we're doing this project, we need a sponsor, you'd be perfect. And they're just expected to know everything there is to know about project sponsorship without having any of the background. And so that's where we end up as project managers, working with people who are, senior, very experienced in their own field, but who have no idea about how projects are supposed to work. And so the book really is about how do we address that.
Right. So how does the book help us address this situation?
It talks about the first part talks about how you can address failings within your sponsor, what sort of things you should be talking to your sponsor about at your first meeting, what sort of sponsors you might encounter, and strategies for dealing with people who don't turn up to meetings or who try to micromanage and be the project manager themselves and things like that. And then there's the guidance in there for sponsors as well about what a good sponsor looks like and what they should be doing. There's also some guidance for organisations. So if you're in a project management office role or a portfolio office role, there's some guidance in there about how you should be growing sponsors within your own organisation to encourage them to do things in a particular way and get the best results for your projects. So there's lots of checklists. It's very practical. You can do personal evaluations and score yourself on tests and things like that, and score your sponsor too.
So if I get this right, this is not just for the project manager. So this book is for the project manager, it's for the project sponsor, and it's also for the organization, so the PMO.
Yes, I didn't think that wide an audience would work, actually. Yeah. But it does help, because you might think, oh, well, I'll just read the bit that's addressed at project managers and skip the rest of it. But it does help to read the bit about what it's like to be a good sponsor, because the more you understand how your sponsor thinks, or the more you understand how your organisation should be working with sponsors at a corporate level, the easier it will be for you to manage your sponsor on your project in your little piece of work. So it does help to see the big picture.
Mm-hmm. Whenever I read a book that tells me, you are X and this is how you should be, I almost feel like I'm being preached to. Mm-hmm. And I'm being put into some kind of a box. This is the box you have to fit in. This is what you're supposed to be doing. Is this? Did you get this feeling from the book as the sponsor, or does it do it in a better way?
I didn't find it preachy, and I don't think it was written in that kind of way. It was written to try to give you the summary of the research that they did, plus some strategies about how do you deal with people at project sponsor level, at project manager level, who sort of fall into these different categories. But you're right, people don't fall into boxes. And one of the things that the book concludes with is saying that you won't get the perfect sponsor. So, whatever tick list box you've done, whatever evaluation you've done, you're not going to get the person who is going to be wonderful and do everything right for your project, because it just doesn't exist. So you should never expect that. So what you need to do instead is come up with some ways that to influence, to negotiate, to involve your sponsor, but without them micromanaging your project. You need to learn to work with what you've got.
Do they tell us what these ways are?
Yes, I found it's a very practical book. So there are some things where, for example, it will say, well, if you've got a project manager, a project sponsor who is micromanaging and trying to come to all your meetings and wants to be copied in on all your emails, then one of the things you can do is sit with them and educate them about the role of the sponsor in a nice way, just to say, actually, you'll be more effective managing the project if they backed off and didn't give your team directions behind your back and things like that. So it gives you some sort of sample. I did find that a little bit cheesy, actually. There are a couple of points in the book where there's sort of sample conversations. And
okay,
yeah, right.
Yeah, role playing.
Like
okay,
but overall, it just gives you an indication of the kind of response you could have to a difficult situation. I think it's very easy to manage sponsors when it's all going well, but when it all starts to go a little bit pear-shaped, and you have to talk to someone who's potentially a lot higher in the organisation than you are, it does help to have some techniques in your back pocket.
Anything particular that you took away from this book that you think, wow, this is something that I can use well, this is something that I will implement on my next project?
I think the biggest thing I took away from it was the difference between engaging stakeholders and managing stakeholders.
Uh-huh.
Because up until I read it, I thought that it was the same thing, really, and that it was just a more politically correct way of saying engaging stakeholders was just a nicer way of saying we'll manage the stakeholders. But actually, it explains that they're two different things. You can manage stakeholders in a very sort of administrative way with stakeholder analysis and a communication plan, and you can engage stakeholders, and your sponsor is one of them, through spending time with them, through articulating the benefits of the project, through making sure that they feel valued on the project. It's a much more emotional thing than the very concrete stakeholder management strategies that you'll read about in project management textbooks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and I think that's something that we should all. I mean, I've started doing that. I think it's a good technique to do, to take your stakeholder management to the next level.
Mm-hmm. And talking about project management textbooks, the latest version of the PMBOK guide has a new knowledge area, which is all about stakeholder management. Does the book at all make any reference to that? Does it acknowledge this, or is there any correlation between this book and the fact that the PMBOK guide now suddenly has stakeholder management in it as well?
No, I don't think there is. This book came out in April, so before the new version of the PMBOK came out. To be honest, I can't remember. There might be a passing reference.
Okay. All right. But there is no direct correlation.
There's no direct link.
Addressing it per se.
You wouldn't read this as a companion book to the PMBOK to give you information about stakeholders from that knowledge area.
Okay. So if I understand you correctly, then let's see if I get this right. The book itself is a good read, and it will open up your eyes as a project manager in understanding what your sponsors are like, because just like you, they're most likely accidental project sponsors. They fell into this role just like you may have fallen into the role of a project manager. However, once you're done reading it, don't give the book away. Put it on your shelf, because you can use it as a reference. You can go back to it at the moment when you have to deal with a sponsor who's doing something that is not the way, not in the optimal way. And then there are strategies in the book that will help you overcome that and help guide the sponsor towards being a more effective sponsor. So that's sort of a good overall synopsis.
That's an excellent summary, yes.
Wow. and this is what I got out of your review on your website. So, and I must admit, the one thing when I really, when my eyes really went big was with the discussion of the accidental sponsor. I had never thought of it.
I hadn't thought of it like that
I
either.
hadn't thought of that. And as soon as I saw accidental sponsor, everything made sense. Everything that I had seen from my sponsors and how bad they were and how completely not understanding what we're trying to do, what their roles are. Suddenly, oh my God, of course they have no idea, because they have no idea.
Well, one of the things the book talks about is how important that very first meeting with your sponsor is.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Yeah, it's a really good opportunity to go to them with your list of questions, find out what they've done in the past, because if they haven't worked on any projects, you've got a bit of an uphill road to climb to get them to do what you need them to do. But if they've got loads of experience, you can sit back a bit and think, actually, they aren't so accidental after all.
So what in particular do they suggest you do when you meet your sponsor for the first time? Are there any particular checklists they have or suggestions?
There are some questions that they offer around finding out about the sponsor's background and experience, but also things like, how do you want to communicate? So they recommend that you get your sponsor to agree to certain turnaround times for decisions, for example, because they may think, that's fine, you can wait a week to find out whether or not we're going to go forward with this, or whether you can have the extra budget for that. So to have those kind of the practical, how are we going to manage this relationship? How do you want to receive communication? How are you going to make decisions? How am I going to keep you updated with status? Those are important, but also to find out about the sponsor's values and objectives, personal objectives for the project. So, what's more important to them comes the iron triangle of time, cost and quality. What sort of boundaries have you got to manage within? And you might find that they're very hands-off and they say, just come to me with problems or when you need a decision and get on with it. Or you might find that actually they're very interested in the topic and want to be hands-on. And from that initial meeting, you should be able to decide how you want to manage that relationship going forward.
And then they also have a section in the book about being a sponsor for the first time, right? That will help the sponsor who gets into this initially understand more what they are expected to do.
Yes, there is a section about that.
All right. So from out of all of this, this book about the sponsorship, what have you personally taken away?
I think the accidental sponsor is a big thing for me. The stakeholder engagement was a big thing. And I think overall, what it points out is that people are very important to projects. We've all got project sponsor. If you haven't got one, then something's wrong on your project. So it's such an important role. It deserves more focus. And I hadn't read a book that specifically focused on sort of how do you get the best out of your sponsor? How should the sponsor project manager relationship work? And I think it was, there's some things in there about making that relationship better that I suppose I'd taken for granted. And I know now that you need to actually actively work at these things and help your sponsor as you would help other members of your project team.
Wonderful. Elizabeth, thank you very much for having been here today and given us the review of these 3 books. I appreciate your time very much.
That's all right. Thank you for having me.
And those were our book reviews with Elizabeth Harron. Are you PMP certified and want to earn 37 PDUs quickly and for less than $5 per PDU? That's no problem with the Agile Prepcast. It not only prepares you for your PMI ACP exam, but also qualifies for a ton of PMP PDUs. Log on at agileprepcast.com/PDU for the details. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please do tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this quote from an unknown project manager. Of all the things I've done, the most vital is coordinating the talents of those who work for us and pointing them towards a certain goal. Until next time.